when you're live, when that thing loads up and it's actually connects to the page, you can go ahead and shut the browser.
Okay, so that I don't have the echo. Yeah.
Almost.
Okay.
We're live.
We get on the sound?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, well, let's get this meeting started. We're going to have a city council workshop tonight, It's April 4th, 2023. We're down in the mill, and this is also being recorded for our YouTube channel. And I'm going to hand the meeting over to Council Vice President Peterson.
Thank you.
Can we ask that everyone turn their mic on? Sorry about that. Thank you.
On. Yeah.
It's like,
Just trying not to shout in the microphone.
meeting.
I shouted last week.
well, welcome everybody. April 4th here. Discussion items tonight. We have climate mitigation plan, 2022 year-end financial report, 2023 budget amendment, and review of April 11th council meeting agenda. So let's start off with item A, Melissa Place, climate mitigation plan.
Thank you. I'm going to share a presentation. Pull this up here. Give me a minute. There we go. All right. Thank you for that. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Melissa Place, Senior Planner with the city. For your consideration this evening, we are bringing the climate mitigation plan as a workshop discussion item to you this evening. Joining us on the Zoom call, we have 3 members of the city's team here. We've got Gretchen Muller, Laura Betcher, and Alicia Fennell, and they will be presenting tonight along with myself. So the goals for this meeting are to really provide a recap of the climate mitigation plan. What is it and what is going to be in it? Provide a crosswalk or a cross-reference, if you will, between the existing comprehensive plan goals and policies and the draft strategies and actions of this climate mitigation plan. Also, we would like to share what we've heard from the public to date. We've had a community workshop a couple of weeks ago, a focus group with utility and outside agencies, and then we also have a survey that's ongoing and that is going to close this Thursday, I believe, at midnight. And lastly, we'd like to confirm our priorities with the council and also the city on what the goals and the targets of this plan are. So what is it and what does it mean for Lake Stevens? I'll just have a little background and remarks here before I turn this over to Gretchen with the consultant. The city has existing adopted policies that are in the city's comprehensive plan. Those policies have environmental basis that helps lay the groundwork for this climate mitigation plan. A number of those policies align with, and I think I included in attachment 1, the draft strategies and actions and how they align with our existing comprehensive plans and goals. And the goal of this document is really to be able to incorporate this into our 2024 comprehensive plan update that's coming up next year. There is a House Bill 1181 in front of the state right now, and that bill is looking at making the climate change element mandatory in comprehensive plans. And so why we're undertaking this whole effort is really to prepare ourselves. If that becomes mandatory, we have that information and we can easily incorporate it into our comprehensive plan. We did receive a grant for this work from Department of Commerce. So we do have money for it at this time, which is why we're undertaking this effort, because we can use the money for the consultant to help prepare this. There is no guarantee that in the future we'll get money from the state to do some of this work. So that's why we're taking advantage of that right now. I also wanted to add that we're sharing these elements of the plan with you as we go along through the process, so that when we get to the point of adoption in June, you've at least seen a lot of the elements, hopefully everything we've gone through, addressed concerns and questions you had, and that we can come to a final adoption point in June. The grant does end in June, and so that would be why we have to adopt it at that point. And I will turn it over to Gretchen to share the next part of the presentation. Gretchen.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you all so much for having us tonight, and a couple of my team members that joined as well. And so we'll be tag teaming throughout the course of these, we've got a few context setting slides before we really turn it over to you all to get some input on both the vision statement and as well as proposed targets too. So these next couple of slides will look familiar to you all from the time that I was with you all just a month ago. And this first one here is related to, what will the climate mitigation plan include? So in terms of what it will include, really will include the strategies and actions that Lake Stevens can take to address climate change, as well as reduce its ecological footprint. This next slide here, and these 4 circles, also a familiar slide to you all. These are the 4 main overarching goals of this plan. The first being to identify strategies and actions to reduce emissions. The second, to ensure that this plan aligns with state, regional greenhouse gas reduction goals. Speaks to those goals. The plan strategies and actions have also gone through an equity assessment. That's that third bubble. And so at the time when I was here last time, mentioned that it was going to go through, those actions were going to go through that equity assessment filter, and that work has happened. So in the upcoming days, we'll be working with city staff to refine a few of the actions as it relates to that equity assessment. The 4th main goal is really to get you all set up to be in the position to incorporate climate policy into your 2024 comprehensive plan update, as Melissa just mentioned. So climate mitigation plans are expected to be a requirement, as she mentioned, for future comprehensive planning efforts. And this is one of the key elements of that, and really lays the foundation and groundwork for future efforts in the comprehensive planning space. And there's also a lot of potential federal and state funding that will be available in the upcoming months. And the plan will help the city of Lake Stevens be eligible for some of those funds as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Laura, who's going to be walking through, again, you'll see one slide that is familiar to you all in terms of the focus areas, but she'll be really referencing and walking you all through that crosswalk document, which was part of the staff report that Melissa circulated to you all at the end of last week. And then with that, I'll turn it over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Gretchen. So just to reiterate, this project includes support for the comprehensive plan amendments to your 2024 upcoming planning process. And as part of this task, we conducted a crosswalk of your current comprehensive plans, policies, and goals, and the draft mitigation plan strategies and actions to determine alignment, overlap, and flag them for potential integration. We'll be walking through some of the findings from that crosswalk, which again is, I think, attachment 1 in your packet. So as you may remember from Gretchen's presentation, these are the main buckets or categories under which all of our strategies and actions fit. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to get into how the climate mitigation plan connects to the Lake Stevens 2024 comp plan update. So we are in the process of linking the draft climate mitigation plan strategies and actions with the 2024 comp plan update. Not only is it critical that Lake Stevens planning efforts across departments and topics talk to each other, but House Bill 1181, which was House Bill 1099 in 2022, but did not pass, is being considered by the legislature and would require integration of the climate mitigation plan and the 2024 comp plan update. Whether this bill passes this round or in a future legislative session, we anticipate this to be the direction of future comprehensive planning efforts across the state, and Lake Stevens will be ahead of the curve. So local communities have typically addressed climate change through functional plans such as climate action plans and hazard mitigation plans. The comp plan is the logical vehicle for a more holistic, integrated framework and strategies to mitigate and adapt to climate change across community systems, including land use, the built environment, natural and social ecosystems, transportation, infrastructure, and the economy. Commerce, the Washington State Department of Commerce, does have current guidance out in its climate element that states cities and counties may use the model climate element to integrate mitigation and resilience goals and policies within a single climate chapter or across several chapters, for example, as part of housing, land use, and transportation documents, which is what our Task 5 deliverable will do. The Task 5 deliverable will include a memo of climate-focused comprehensive plan amendments and a schedule of proposed actions. The crosswalk I'm about to talk about is a key piece of that work. So now we're going to talk about the link between the climate mitigation plan and your comprehensive plan. Conducting a crosswalk of your comprehensive plan and the climate mitigation plan draft strategies and actions is an important step in helping ensure that Lake Stevens 2024 comp plan and the CMP are in alignment. The crosswalk also identifies where there is an opportunity to address some of the gaps, which are the places where the current climate mitigation plan actions are not addressed in your current comp plan, but could be integrated into the 2024 comp plan. This slide captures the high-level findings from that crosswalk. 33 out of 48 actions in the climate mitigation plan have corresponding, related, or supporting goals or policies in the comprehensive plan, and you'll find them listed in the table included in your meeting packet. The other bullet points on this slide divide out those the supporting comprehensive plan policies by like those buckets or categories that we talked about in the very beginning. And I think now I'm going to turn it back to Gretchen to talk about what we've heard so far.
Excellent. And all these slides are really setting the context for the discussion portion that we'll move into in just a few moments here. So as Melissa mentioned, we have, heard, we've had a few touch points with the public, both via the workshop as well, a couple of workshops, as well as the survey. And we wanted to provide you all with a snapshot of what we've heard so far through those engagement efforts. And again, noting that the survey hasn't quite closed. So some of these these are preliminary findings, at least on the survey front. Go to the next slide, please. So again, what you'll see here on this snapshot slide are a few of the key takeaways as they are right now. And as the survey results stand right now, again, we've got a couple more days where we'll then be synthesizing, once the survey closes, the results as well. But what we've got so far is that this is what we've heard from, that compared to state reduction targets, most respondents via that survey, as well as the participants of the workshop, believe and think that Lake Stevens should be on par with similar cities in its climate reductions. Majority agree that climate mitigation is good for the health and livability of their community. There's strong support, particularly in the buildings and energy, as well as transportation focus areas or bucket strategies, and recommend expanding these programs kind of within those main focus areas. And strong support for encouraging climate and environmental education and awareness for both the public and the youth. So those are some of the key takeaways that we've heard so far. And we also wanted to provide a snapshot. We hosted an outside agency focus group. The agencies that were in attendance, Snohomish County PUD, Waste Management, Puget Sound Energy, and Community Transit, and walked through a series of discussion questions with them, and shared the draft actions across each of the strategies, across each of those focus areas, and got their general input, thoughts, reflections, insights, and also some suggestions for word choice edits, as well as really flagging some of the areas where they could be key partners in the implementation of some of these. So they also mentioned in that focus group space some of the programs that were in alignment and where they already had staff, they already had resources, education materials related to some of the actions, and so they flagged that as well. And there were some general concerns regarding grid reliability when switching from gas to electric. Participants also suggested the need for developing education around cradle-to-cradle recycling, being smart consumers. One of the other things that was mentioned in a theme across the discussion, that more transit center development with incentives for commuters, increased walkability around school routes was also noted. and developing space for vulnerable populations to deal with extreme heat, cold, poor air quality. So those are some of the key findings there. All right, and now we're going to go into really, again, a critical piece in terms of setting the stage for this discussion that we'll have with you all in just a couple of minutes. So with that, really transitioning into providing some background and context that is extra helpful in terms of helpful framing for our discussion with you all about the goals, the targets, and the proposed vision, each of which are in the staff report in that meeting packet. So we can go to the next slide. Great. So we wanted to start by sharing some context about Snohomish County's emissions, and also noting that although Lake Stevens hasn't done a greenhouse gas inventory to understand where local emissions come from, that Snohomish County did conduct a recent greenhouse gas inventory. We think there's a lot of relevance and in terms of sharing this information with you all as a backdrop to this upcoming discussion. And you'll see in this table here, it's not a table, a pie graph, that the top 3 sources of emissions countywide in 2019 were on-road vehicles, which made up 1/3 of total emissions, tree loss, which represented about 1/5 of total emissions, and natural gas, which accounted for 16% of total emissions. And we did want to note that, again, this is countywide, and these were our countywide emissions from that study and data resourcing that they did, and that tree loss emissions, when we were having based on the conversations that we've had with community members as well as Melissa, Planning Commission, and other staff, that the tree loss emissions are likely a bit less relevant for Lake Stevens than countywide, but we're extrapolating that the county emissions are otherwise representative of Lake Stevens. And then we know that transportation and energy are some of the biggest sources of emissions that we likely need to address with this climate mitigation plan. And this slide here, this is what we call kind of in the climate planning space, a wedge analysis. And this slide shows a visual representation of Snohomish County's future emissions. So the top black dotted line that you see on the top of this wedge assumes that emissions continue as they have, with no action or no intervention. So that's no action is taken, and that's business as usual. And that's what the emissions continue to increase. And that's what that black dotted line shows. The color fill sections below the black dotted line and until the bright pink line, so that all those color bands there represent expected reductions in future emissions based on federal, state, and regional policies that are already in place. And you'll see some of those listed here on the slide. And then that bottom or red dashed line at the bottom of that wedge represents countywide emissions if they were to hit the state targets. And we'll be talking about targets with you all momentarily. And the state targets right now for Washington State, 45% reduction by 2030, 70% by 2040, and then 95% by 2050. And so that light gray, the not colorful section of this, represents the difference, or the remaining emissions that Snohomish County would need to reduce to hit those targets shown by that red dashed line. And this is where the climate mitigation plan measures come in. So those actions, those draft actions that we have as part of your climate mitigation plan to date, and where those actions really try to address these emissions for Lake Stevens. Any questions on either the pie graph that I just walked through or the wedge analysis before we head into the discussion portion?
Not seeing any, Gretchen.
Okay. So we will keep going here. Great. So we wanted to talk with you all about these 3 example sets of targets to provide some regional context. And we added one more. So you'll see 3 potential options that are up on the slide in the staff report that you all have in front of you. There are 2. So we added one additional one for your all's consideration. And so this top one is Snohomish County targets. So this is what Snohomish County has adopted in terms of their adopted targets. So Snohomish County's current adopted targets are to achieve 100% clean electricity by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2045 for government operations. So note that this is a target that the target for Snohomish County focuses solely on energy emission sources and only within government operations. So it doesn't include the broader community. So we wanted to note that. And then these other two sets of targets that you'll see on the screen here apply to all emissions. So the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, otherwise known as PSCAA, has targets to reduce emissions 50% below 1990 levels by 2030, 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. And then below that are the state's targets. So again, reducing 1990 greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030, 70% by 2040, 95% by 2050, plus net zero emissions. So these sets of targets get at different sources of emissions. So the county's targets aim to address government energy emissions, and PSCAA and the state's targets aim to address all community-wide emissions, which means that PSCAA and the state's targets are much more wide-reaching, which is why from our vantage point, we would recommend aligning the Lake Stevens targets with one of those two. PSCAA's targets are slightly more ambitious in the short term, with a greater reduction goal by 2030, but the state's targets are more ambitious in the long run with greater reduction goals by 2050. So we wanted to lay out three potential possibilities and share our recommendation based on best practices and other planning efforts across other lake jurisdictions. So wanting to pause there, I know we've got a couple of discussion questions that are coming right after this, but any questions on the targets, how targets are used, the difference between these three targets that we've put forward for your all's consideration and discussion?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yes.
When we say we want to reduce emissions by 45% below 1990 levels, exactly what emissions are we talking about?
Well, what would be in there? Yeah, that's a great question. Alicia, do you want to address that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Alicia Fennell. Right. So with these, when it says reduce emissions below 1990 levels, those are generally referring to, all the emissions within the jurisdictional control. So, that basically what's included in that is tied to what the target is. So for the state, that's reduced statewide emissions from all sources that are within the state's control below 1990 emission levels by those given dates.
And it relates to that pie graph too. So where are all the emission sources coming from?
Okay, so if we want to reduce, we want to reduce emissions caused by people going into the environment. I got that. I understand that. What I don't understand is what is the end game? Are we trying to get down to 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere instead of the 417 parts per million we're at right now, which has been the same for about 100,000 years? Or what? What are we trying to accomplish? And how much, if we meet our goals, how much would that affect the CO2 levels on the Earth?
Lake Stevens versus kind of the world. I mean, yeah, Lake Stevens is one player on a global landscape, right? And so that's why Washington State has targets in hopes that each of the jurisdictions in Washington State will adopt those targets and be working in jointly across the state as a state. And then in terms of Washington State's targets, it's that net zero emissions, right? So working towards that. And I don't know, Alicia, if there's more, but obviously globally, right, we're all in this together. But that's why we're providing you all with, a snapshot of Snohomish County's targets and where they're at and what they're looking to do. Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, which is those are regional targets, and then the statewide targets for those three different vantage points.
Any other questions of council members? What happens if we don't meet these targets?
What happens if you don't meet the targets? Well, I think we could go back to the wedge analysis, which is a great example. And one of the things that we always say in really any planning effort, whether it's a climate planning effort or really any planning effort kind of across the way, is having checkpoints and adaptively managing along the way, right? So that's why you set targets, is to be like, all right, what's our end game? Where do we want to head? And what are those key milestones where we're actually tracking against them to know we may need to dial some actions up, maybe we can dial some actions down. But that's why you want to adaptively manage your plan and build in those feedback loops throughout the course of the lifespan of this plan. So to course correct if you need to, if it looks like, oh, well, we really haven't made the gains that we want to make and that we need to make as per these targets. So we need to take another look at the actions and where do we need to adaptively manage? Where are we, across those focus areas? Where are we headed in the right direction in terms of meeting our targets? And maybe in other focus areas, not so much. And so looking at that, figuring out why that is, and then having discussions and working with city staff to adaptively manage the plan.
I would like to say something also, and I apologize for forgetting your name, but it's so tiny at print. I can't read it.
Gretchen.
Gretchen, thank you. So if we don't do this, we have ourselves to blame. What happens to those little kids I see running around out there when they grow up? Are we going to make this world a better place? And I appreciate your hard work. I am in 100% support of taking action. And if there's anything as a council member I can do, I am there for you. I want you to know we need to do something. This is, I've lived long enough to have seen the change in this world that we live in and seen the things that are happening. Weather across the country, weather across the world, crazy things are happening, and it's all tied to our climate. So if we don't step up now, the kids will be looking at us and say, what were you thinking? We really need to step up. And I really appreciate, Gretchen, the hard work you and Melissa are putting into this, and the other lady that's over there too. This isn't just about 7 council members and a mayor. It's about our whole community. It's about all our kids, especially. And it's just, there are small steps that you can take. I just want to say something here. This bottle I brought, it's not a plastic bottle. I can reuse it. Plastic bottles take 900 years to break down. And I saw that, Gary. But really, and there's small things. The president of the Historic Society they are collecting plastic for benches. And she said yesterday she turned in 69 pounds of plastic that did not go into waste. And benches would be great to have along Centennial Trail or even around town. And they don't cost anything. You just turn in the plastic till you reach 500 pounds and bingo, you have a bench. There's just simple things we as a community can do. And I would love to see this become a definite thing for us to take action on. And I might be done talking now. Thank you for listening.
Hey, Gretchen, what is clean electricity and clean energy? What are those?
That's a great catch and a good distinction. I'm going to turn over to Alicia because she'll give you the best definition and best descriptor of the difference between those two.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for that question. And I'll caveat that, since these are Snohomish County's targets, I don't work for Snohomish County. So they, if we want to follow up and get more context from someone at the county, that might be helpful. But generally, our understanding with clean electricity means that it's electricity that produces zero emissions. So the sources that are used to generate that electricity are clean or renewable. So, for example, Washington State gets a lot of its electricity energy from hydropower. That would be considered a clean, in this case, I think, source of electricity versus I believe PSE still has some coal in its electricity generation. And so that's something that does produce emissions when it's burned and then turned into electricity. So our understanding generally is that clean electricity means their goal is to have all government operations using basically emissions-free electricity by 2030. And then clean energy, again, this is something that would be good to follow up with the county on if we, want to know more information, because I can't speak definitively for the county, but I would interpret that to mean that all of their energy for all facilities and buildings that fall within government operations, all of that energy is emissions free, which since natural gas produces emissions, I would interpret this to mean that basically all facilities are powered by electricity, and that electricity comes from those renewable sources. So that's about the extent that I can speak to on that. And if we can also follow up with the county, if it would be helpful to get more details on this target of theirs.
Okay, thank you.
I hope this is more of a goal than a requirement, because what starts out as a goal
Turns
then
into,
almost turns into
yeah.
a requirement at the very last second, which nobody can meet, and then you can't get grants.
Any other questions, comments for right now? No, please proceed.
Okay, so we can go to the next slide, which turns it back to you all. And these three areas, I'm really just looking to hear from you all, and maybe Melissa providing a little more context about why we brought these two questions forward for discussion and your all's consideration. So we did want to hear from you all in terms of, as you look at the state reduction targets, as you look at the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency's targets, as you look at Snohomish County's targets, would love to hear from you all in terms of where you're trending, right? Where you think Lake Stevens should be and fall within. So less ambitious. So City of Lake Stevens should encourage its community to take climate action primarily through voluntary incentive-based actions. On par with the state, in particular state reduction targets. So City of Lake Stevens should keep pace with similar cities in its climate reductions. Keeping pace would require a mix of voluntary actions, incentives, disincentives, as well as regulations or mandates, or more ambitious. So really seeing the City of Lake Stevens being a leader in climate mitigation, being a regional leader, potentially being a leader, in the state, it would likely require adopting more disincentives. So factors that deter overuse of waste, water, energy, as well as regulatory measures, in addition to voluntary measures and incentives, and would likely have a larger upfront cost investment. Though I do want to say that there is a cost to inaction. When you think back to that wedge diagram that I showed you, the longer a community waits to take action, the wider that wedge is, and the more your actions will need to do to get to some of those targets. So something to keep in mind. So looking to hear from you all on that first piece. And then the second question here about where you all fall in terms of whether you want to formally adopt greenhouse gas reduction targets. And if so, if there is a particular target that we put forward, the state, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agencies, the county, or potentially creating new targets, right? Like these are three that we brought forward. The options are endless, right? In terms of target setting and landing on a set of targets. So Melissa, do you want to turn it over to you in case there's any additional context setting about why these questions, why we brought these forward for your all's consideration tonight?
Yeah, thanks, Gretchen. I think most of it's in the staff report in the packet. I think at the end of the packet had the same questions, this sort of ambitious and where we want to be. What are your thoughts on formally adopting targets, and where do you want to align with the state, PSACA, which is the air agency, or the county? Kind of just wanting to hear from the council on their input on where you'd like this plan to be.
Shouldn't PUD be weighing in on this too? I mean, how do we know what our targets should and shouldn't be?
Yeah.
I mean, we can go along with the state, but we don't have a way to build a dam here in Lake Stevens. And what are we going to put windmills or wave monitors out there? I mean, how do we know what PUD has in store for us? I mean, this is really hard to, you might as well throw a dart on the wall, try to come up with these targets. How did the state come up with their targets? And we don't get any money from the state to come up with these mandates. The state doesn't give us money. Federal doesn't give us a whole lot of money. So how do we try to meet these targets with the budget that we have? I I don't see how we can put a number on these regulations without having some funding plan for it.
And how does Lake Stevens assess it? Like, do we put up a little carbon emitter sensor in the middle of the city that tells, I don't know, how do you physically assess whether or not you're being successful?
Well, the way that they propose to do it in some of the elements in here about transportation, for instance, is that what they have decided to do is they've decided that they can say, well, if I take one car off of the road and I don't use it anymore, then I save 300 pounds of CO2 a day.
What if it's a Tesla?
They don't have that in there yet. I mean, that's electric, I mean, if you really wanted to dig into it, if you have a Tesla, you're using a heck of a lot more than a fossil fuel car is using a day. So not directly from that car, but to get the car into production. So the only thing we could really do is they could say that, well, if we're not using natural gas in any of our buildings, is we do not have any emissions from that. And, they can come up with how many pounds of emissions we have from that. I mean, not to belabor the fact that the CO2 measurements is the wrong thing to be measuring for climate change. That has nothing to do with this conversation because that's what they've decided to use, even though the science shows that it's not even comparable to what water vapor does for climate change. But this is what we've got to work with. But that's what they do. I mean, we even have it for each of our buses at community transit. How many pounds of CO2 do we put out? Or actually, I should say, the emissions of the emissions that we're worried about, which CO2 is just a very small part of. And so that's how they measure it. So we could say, well, we have more buses, but we have 10 times less cars. So now we have less emissions. This is what we can do. That's how we measure it. Some of the other things in here, there's no measures for it. It's not, I mean, going through the list that we have in attachment 1, there's no way to measure most of these.
Yeah.
It's kind of just commentary. It's interesting. We're talking about things that we can do here in Lake Stevens, but if our neighbors don't do them, what good is it? And it's no different with the world. I mean, we're macro versus micro.
Well, if the United States did all of this, we'd be down 0.2%.
Well, I guess that's my point
of
is
emissions, and then the rest of the world is.
We can do a lot of stuff here in Lake Stevens, but if Everett doesn't do anything or whatever, I mean, the air flows everywhere, right? So it gets back to how do you measure it? I guess we can come up with
a mandate that you're not going to get any more federal funding or state funding unless you put this in there. Everyone's going to put the same thing in. I mean, that's basically.
Yeah, but to what degree though? Like you say, less ambitious, on par, more ambitious. If our neighboring cities are less ambitious, I guess.
The requirement is for us to have something. I say we slash everything in half, and that way we don't get stuck with mandates and we're not passing a bunch of expenses on for stuff that we can't afford. I mean, it's really, there's so many other players involved in this. What would PUD say? I mean, isn't that where we get our power from? Shouldn't we be talking to Seattle Lighting and all these other places to come with a decision? How do we as a council come up with a decision on this, not knowing what everyone else in the regional players are doing? This is like throwing a dart.
And one of my concerns is, let's say we say, okay, every house that's built from now on in Lake Stevens can be electric only. Right. Well, even PUD knows they don't have the capacity for that. So now electricity costs more money. So now our citizens are paying more money because they can't have natural gas in their house to heat their home or cook or, so those are some of the concerns. Once we start putting all our eggs in one basket, like just electricity, then that becomes a monopoly and becomes a very expensive venture. And we all know we don't have the capacity for it.
And yet we want to tear down some dams that produce electricity.
Exactly.
I mean, there's
the clean energy.
If I was I would say we slash everything in half till we see a bigger plan. We have to have something.
And I just want to weigh in on a couple of things that I heard in terms of tracking emissions by actions. And so there are models that tell that story, right, in terms of emissions reductions with certain actions. And so there is a lot of data out there that shows, and even the set of actions, the draft set of actions that you all have in front of you as part of this process, there is a lot of data that says, you know, from a voluntary measure with incentives, dialing that up to regulatory measure and what the difference in terms of emissions reductions look like. And then also just wanting to weigh in and that we did that Melissa, and feel free to jump in to Melissa, that focus group. I know you've had more conversations with PUD and some of the other utilities beyond that one focus group. But so Melissa has made a really concerted effort to engage with utilities and outside entities, agencies as part of this plan. And so they have weighed in and taken a look at the actions and provided input and some recommended revisions to some of those actions, as well as flagging where some of the actions, where they have programs in place, staff resources in place already to support some of these actions. And Melissa, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in more on conversations beyond that focus group.
Yeah, sure. I was going to bring that up. So as part of the focus group meeting that we did with the outside agencies and utilities, we did have PUD and PSC in attendance. And I did bring up the grid reliability question simply because it has been brought up, and asked that directly to two PUD representatives. And they assured that the utility agency has grid reliability right now, and they keep expanding their capacity and resource planning for it, which is why I included a link, because I asked the representative to send me some more information on that so that I could make sure that you had copies of that. And so I think in the packet, I included a link to their website. If you go to that link, it has some basic information, but then at the bottom, there's a link to their direct plans and how they're planning for capacity on their grid system. And so I was just trying to get you more information to try to respond to that question, because I did hear that at the last meeting.
So the problem with that statement is that PUD is saying that, but they're saying that with specifics that they're targeting for what's happening on the grid. And it doesn't include everybody doing everything that we're trying to plan. What it does target is it targets EV, it targets electrifying the buses, it targets electrifying some of the trucks and the cars that we use at the city level and municipality level. And it targets the stuff that they're doing on the school districts and those kinds of things. And beyond that, it doesn't go any further. So when you start cutting other things, such as what we're talking about in our plan or any city's plan, they do not have a plan for that. It overwhelms what their plan is at. So I know what PUD is saying. I've had multiple things of PUD coming to CT and others that I've been involved in, and they're not ready for the entire thing to happen like the state wants it to happen. And they have said that.
Yeah, I do think I got the sense from the representative about that they're if everything were to change today, right, they don't have that capacity, but they're growing their capacity in order to meet the demand, because not all the EVs are going to come on all at once. That's what they basically said. So I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion today.
No,
Right? I mean, we could sit and talk about this for the next hour.
yeah, no, this is not something I think we're looking for an answer today. We're just seeing their presentation and make a decision later on.
So Gretchen, I think, is there another slide with more questions after this? I can't recall, or we?
Yeah, there's the slide with the vision statement and then a set of questions related to that as well.
Okay, so before we go to that, I guess I'd pose to the council. So if we're not ready to adopt reduction targets or have do you want to do an informal poll of where you're at, or do you want to bring it up at the next council meeting to revisit this, or are we not at a point of wanting to adopt any targets at all? I'm just kind of wanting to gauge where you're at to try to.
Is that the only thing you're looking for direction on?
Yeah, well, tonight we can't, so because it's a workshop, we can't make any actual formal action, right, of adoption of targets. And we know that. So maybe it's a regular meeting, that is something that you could bring it up if you wanted to. If you don't want to adopt targets, or just in these three questions, where is each council member at? Do you want to take a poll? We're just trying to make sure that we keep moving the plan along to meet the deadline, but try to get the feedback. And so we can certainly move it to the April 25th meeting. I just kind of wanted to get a gauge on where you're at as a council.
Any thoughts? You want to take a straw poll maybe, or?
Well, if we don't start now,
The wedge gets bigger.
it does. And I think we need to at least learn more, talk more, listen to our citizens more, and see how we can move forward. This is very complicated. I'm not saying it's a simple yes, no thing at all. But I'm really grateful for the hard work that you're doing.
But,
So-
okay, so I'm sorry, am I redone?
I'm done.
So what you're looking for us so that you can continue planning it, or from the council, I'm sorry, is do we want to go less ambitious, on par, more ambitious, maybe somewhere in between one of those two? Is that what you're
Absolutely.
looking for?
Yep, that's
So
exactly
if we
it.
told you, if they told you, I don't like all of less ambitious, I don't like all of on par, but maybe somewhere in the middle that might
Mhm.
work for you and you could move forward.
Yeah, that helps us. We can, yeah, I think that definitely helps. And Gretchen, if you want to weigh in more on the plan, I think. So communities are, and we had included that in the packet, there's a couple that haven't adopted any formal targets, right? They're just, here's some reduction measures we can do, and we're going to align with the state targets at some point. So it's just sort of where you want to be in that sort of less ambitious, on par, or
I'm
more
fine with that.
ambitious.
Well,
I agree with that one.
Which one? In the middle of?
They
Less
don't have
ambitious.
don't have any targets. We just are going to align with what the state wants and we'll get there someday.
And you kind of go along with the less ambitious.
Right. Yeah.
Less ambitious will
Steve?
align someday.
I support encouraging our citizens to take appropriate action because they've demonstrated repeatedly that they're capable and willing to do the right thing.
I agree.
Does that give you enough flavor for the night?
So I think what I'm hearing is that we're in the more less ambitious area, and then aligning with the state's goals down the road. Is that what or goals and targets?
Maybe.
Okay.
So the question okay, yeah.
That's
You got
okay.
that? Are we done with that part?
Councilmember Donahue has his
Yes.
hand up.
Well, if we're done, we can go ahead and move on. So I'll ask my question and then leave it to the group. My question is, when we were trying to take the temperature of this issue with the citizens, I think, if you ask a group of people, do we want to do something about the climate? The sentiment will be yes. What were we able to give them in terms of it's going to cost you X to get there, though? Were there any trade-offs presented to them when that question was asked about how aggressive they want to tackle this?
Are you, Councilmember, are you asking for if we provided costs per action?
Correct. Yeah. So when we're asking the citizens, do we want to deal with this? Were we able to say, but your power bill is going to go up by this much, or homes are going to become this much more expensive? Were they made aware of any potential trade-offs in answering that question and engaging that sentiment?
I'd have to look back to specific questions in the survey, but we don't have specific price points for these set of actions. So we'll be doing a cost assessment for up to 10 actions a little bit later in this process. But yeah, that work hasn't, that piece was not included in the survey. We don't usually include those pieces in public surveys, but we can share the survey. And if you haven't taken it, you still have 2 days to take it so you can see for yourself what the specific questions were.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are any further questions right now, or should we move on to the next slide?
Let's move forward here.
Okay. All right, next slide. Gretchen?
Yeah, so we also wanted to provide you, because one of the approaches some communities take is if they're not looking to formally adopt targets, we'll have a vision statement, and so drafted something and put in here the Snohomish County greenhouse gas targets. And so would love to hear, we've got a set of discussion questions, and we included as attachment 2 in your meeting packet, or attachment B, the set of questions, and we've got them on a slide here too. So give you all just a moment to read through this. And I don't know if you don't have your meeting packet, and I'm not sure, I can't remember how big the screen is. So I'll just go ahead in the council chambers. I'll just go ahead and read this just to get us all on the same page here. So the draft vision statement as it stands right now, City of Lake Stevens' future is one where the community unites to ensure an environment that is clean, healthy, and enjoyable for all people and future generations. With a shared love of the lake, residents work toward creating a healthy, resilient community by connecting people, by walking, biking, or taking transit where they need to go. Homes and businesses are energy efficient and run largely on renewable energy, where waste is reduced or recycled and where water is continually available. This vision will put us in alignment with the Snohomish County greenhouse gas emissions targets, which aim to achieve 100% clean electricity by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2045. And we can come back to this if you want this up while you're answering these questions or weighing in on these set of questions that we put forward for your all's consideration. But let's go ahead to the next slide, so I can just list out these questions for you all. If you're able to advance, yeah, thanks. So looking to hear your thoughts on the vision statement. So what are your overall thoughts, reactions to this vision statement? Do you all think anything's missing from the vision statement? And if so, what? And then what else do you want the vision statement to convey about Lake Stevens? So with those three questions in mind, we can go ahead back to the next slide, or the previous slide, which lists that vision statement, and then we'd love to open it up and get your thoughts.
Folks want to take some time with this and maybe revisit this in a little bit?
In a little bit, like in a week or two or something. That we can have time to really grasp the concept of this.
Kind of absorb what's going on here.
So my points are it's too verbose. Transit should be taken out of there because we're not going to get a trestle within 2030. Without the trestle, we'll have no transit. It will not, that won't work. And by 2030 it's not doable.
And I have issues with like saying that we're going to be 100% clean energy by 2045. And when we call natural gas not clean, so we're telling our citizens that we expect you by 2045 to replace everything in your house that's natural gas to electricity. Clean electricity, whatever that means. As long as the dams aren't torn down.
And I'll just jump in here, and I see that the phrasing of the vision statement just says, you know, clean electricity and clean energy, period. But the Snohomish County targets are just for government operations. So I guess that's just another kind of consideration within this, is that the Snohomish County targets are just for government operations. So for them, that means, you know, county operations, and it could be something to consider for city operations, but not, you know, community-wide. Just another kind of factor and point to consider within this.
I just worry about the expenses that come along with trying to do this. Were you going to pass it on to home prices and then we still talk about affordability?
Yeah.
I worry about all the expenses that come into play with this, even for us. I mean, we have a tough budget already. What are we going to, you know, revamp our whole system to the tune of $1 million? What $1 million? And there's no state grants for the most part for this stuff. It's a big reach. I think we need more time to think about it before we sit and try to come up with a vision statement.
So I agree with you. I understand we want to move this along, but your vision statement doesn't say what you just said. Your vision statement is saying that we want Lake Stevens and their citizens and everything else to do this, not just the government entities. And that's not what that says. But that's what you're alluding to.
And why does a Lake Stevens vision statement include a vision statement for the county in which we reside? It should be for Lake Stevens.
So yeah, we'll talk about it. I don't need
Let's
continue.
yeah. We'll put our thoughts down and talk about it a little bit. So
Yeah, just put a clarification for Alicia's point. When you think back a couple of slides, when we walk through the Snohomish County target, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency target, and then the state target, she just wanted to clarify that this statement that we put in the vision statement doesn't speak to that government operations piece that Snohomish County actually, that the vision for Snohomish County is connected to. So she just wanted to put in that additional piece of information that doesn't show up. You're right, it doesn't show up as part of the statement here.
So I appreciate all the input, and when we, that last sentence, we were quite aware that that may be revised to whatever the council determines a target or where we want to go with it. So I know there's other jurisdictions that have put this vision will meet the targets of the state. In this case, we put in alignment because we were trying to be tentative, but we knew that this would most likely be subject to change, and then all the language in it, right? So absolutely can have this conversation a later time. April 25th, I think, is the next meeting come up, and we can put it on that if that's the desire of the council.
Well, this is a vision statement for the mitigation plan, not for the city.
Correct. That's correct. Yep.
Are we just doing the vision statement portions, or this can be from the top again?
We can do the draft vision statement. There will be more documents on the 25th that will be coming to you for review. So as we're working through this, there's just a continuation of documents so that it's going to become a compilation of the plan, a draft plan in May for your review, the entire plan, and then with the adoption in June. So it's just a really quick timeline, and they're constantly working behind the scenes to create all these documents. It gets staff to review them and then bringing them forth to council for consideration. Yeah, good question. Any further questions?
Yeah, I got one more. On the attachment one, several of these things actually do not make any sense. So can we just kind of write into you what the problems are in here that I see? I mean, for instance, under heat pump program, we're talking about reduce greenhouse gases by expanding the use of conservation and alternative energy sources by reducing vehicle miles traveled. What's that got to do with heat pumps? I haven't seen that technology yet.
Okay, good. Yeah, good point. Absolutely. Provide any revisions.
That's not the only one. There's several. I'm not going through them tonight, but
Okay.
can we just write this up and send it in for our comments on that then?
Yeah.
Just to get this going.
That would be fine. Yes, you can send them to me directly and I can pass them along to consultant. And Gretchen, did you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering if Laura, if you want to jump in and kind of address that crosswalk document. But absolutely, if there are any and all comments related to that and any questions that you all may have, sending them on to Melissa to share with us as we continue to refine each of the elements of this draft plan is welcome. But Laura, do you want to jump in here and address anything related to that crosswalk, or do you think we have it covered, Melissa and I?
I mean, I think that I really encourage you all to look at the crosswalk document and just, I guess, just look and see where all of the existing support from is in the comp plan, and where all of the parallels and corresponding policies in the comp plan are with draft measures in the climate mitigation plan. And yes, revisions can happen, but I think it is really just useful to see, to look at that table and to see how easily the comp plan can be integrated, can have climate integrated into it. But how much easier it is to integrate climate into the comp plan using this mitigation plan.
Yeah. And it's not a perfect kind of one-to-one, right? Like the goals that were pulled from your existing comprehensive plan. So I think you're referencing the 7.9.7, the reduce greenhouse gases by expanding the use of conservation and alternative energy sources. And then there's a second half of that, which is reducing vehicle miles traveled. The action that you're referencing, the heat pump action, is directly relevant to that first part. It is not relevant to the second part. So I think it's what we did is we went through and did a crosswalk of all the goals within your existing comprehensive plan and align them with the actions, the draft actions as they are right now in the climate mitigation plan, but it's not a direct one-to-one every time. And I think the example that you brought forward is a great example of that. The first part of that statement from your comprehensive plan is directly related to the draft mitigation measure, but the second part of that, the vehicle miles traveled, is not. but we wanted to include the whole statement as it is written in your comprehensive plan. And we did have a couple of slides, just one slide, actually one slide that concludes what are the next steps. And so if we want to head there.
Yeah, Gretchen, I think Councilmember Peter Shagan has a question.
I was just going to say, we're kind of running on some time here. We've spent an hour on this already, and I apologize, but we do have a number of things on the agenda yet. So can we kind of maybe take a couple of minutes and kind of get to the finish line here?
We're actually done. So perfect timing. So these are the next steps. And you'll see that we'll be summarizing public input in April. We'll be finalizing a list of draft measures by incorporating community feedback, as well as that equity assessment, cost benefit assessment through May, and then developing that draft climate mitigation plan in May. And so that's all we have for you all tonight. Thanks so much for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate you helping us out here. So with that, we'll move along. And again, if we have comments, let's get them into staff and so forth. So let's move on to item B, 2022 year-end financial report. Barb Stevens.
Okay. Good evening, Council. So welcome to 2022 year end. It is April, but we are a little ahead of last year. So I'm feeling accomplished here. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me get this out of my way so I can see. Okay, so we will start with our budget versus actual for all funds. This is citywide. I'm sorry, I forgot to send these out to you before council. I will get them out after council so you guys can take a better look at them. But so for overall, I tried to color code. Your 2022 budget is in the orange, your 2022 estimate is the gray, and your 2022 actual is the yellow. And I do have the budget versus actual and then estimated versus actual. The budget versus actual, the budget numbers throughout here are the original 22 budget plus any amendments that occurred throughout the year. And then the estimate is what we used near the end of last year in order to create our beginning fund balances for 2023 and our estimated revenues and expenditures. So overall, our revenue came in 95% of budget, and then expenditures were about 60%. So the variances for the revenues and expenditures, they're mainly due to ongoing multi-year projects, and then some are funded by reimbursement grants. So the majority of that decrease is based on ongoing transactions. Additionally, just like in the past year, we had some difficulty in hiring, left some positions open, causing some departments to be under budget on the expenditure side as well. But overall, we do continue to be fiscally responsible and have a strong cash balance going into 2023 in order to fund our council priorities. So I'll go over the major revenue sources. I know most of you have seen this before. The revenue sources are color coded by fund. So you have your revenue sources in column 1, the fund or funds in column 2, the uses, whether they're restricted or completely unrestricted. So if they're restricted, it has to be for a specific purpose, or sometimes like the capital is restricted to things that are in the comp plan for specific purposes. In this, I also included 2021 as well as 2022 budget estimate actual. And then the last column I have there is your increase from 21 to 22. So you can kind of see what happened. And then I highlighted the green one, that is our 2022 actual, just to kind of help that stand out. So I'll just go over a few of these. I know this isn't the easiest thing to look at. I do have a chart in the next slide that is a little easier on the eyes. So sales tax came in 4% higher than 2021. So that's the first highlighted one. Again, last column is increased 21 to 2022. And it was 8% more than we had estimated. The budget versus actual was only 5% over, but we did some refiguring and lowered our estimates mid-year due to some slow earnings, but we received an influx of construction sales tax in the last quarter of 2022, which actually bumped us back up. So that is why that one was. And then the criminal justice affordable housing sales tax, that one actually goes along with, it's a part of sales tax. So that goes right in line with sales tax. The next color coded section, that's building permits and zoning and subdivisions, those came in under budget. So we will go ahead and take another look at those just to see what we have expected, what we have known expected, and adjust those as needed. Traffic impact fees, that is the light gray down near the bottom. That one, those did come in significantly under budget, and that does coincide with the decrease in the land use permits. And then park mitigation was actually over budget, but it was still under our year-end estimate. So we will keep those, keep an eye on those so we can actually make sure we're fully funding our projects this year. And then the bottom one, we have surface water fees. Those are 17% higher than in 2021. The majority of that is due to, one, we have a set annual increase on those. And then we also did a fairly large annexation. And then we also got the full school district payment starting in 2022. In 2021, it was a half payment, and then we worked our way in. So we will be actually adjusting the 2023 budget according to the 2022 actual. And I will show you what that looks like. So again, this is same major revenue sources, again, including 2021 actuals, and also shows the 2023 adopted budget. And this is the actual budget right now without any amendments that are coming forward. And you can see, so the first one we have is, so the light blue, that's 2021, goes budgeted 2022, actual 22, dark blue, and then the yellow is the adopted 2023. And we start at the bottom, and that's actually the sales tax, and that's the largest revenue source. It makes up 13% of our citywide revenues. The next is your property tax, and that's second at 11%. And I will be going over a decrease in that budget during our budget amendment presentation. There was a calculation. It has to do with the way the Snohomish County assessor calculates annexation estimates. And so our annexation portion actually decreased based on the amounts that they use, the levy amounts they use. So I'll show you that in the next presentation. And then the next one up was the stormwater fees. As I mentioned, we will be amending these. As you can see, 2022, we received 4.5 million, and our 2023 budget is actually lower than that. So we will be increasing that. The general increase is 3% in our fees resolution. And then we generally add about 2% just for new residential, unless we're doing big annexations, and then we add additional. And then the next utility taxes did increase significantly in 2022. And again, a lot of this has to do with the annexations. We did a large annexation that brought in a lot of additional customers, and also provider increases. A number of the providers do CPI increases, and we know what the CPI increases were the last couple of years. And then the REIT, I just wanted to note that it did decrease from 2021, yet it exceeded our budget expectations. This does go in line with our forecasting of REIT, that it will continue to decrease over the next few years, just because there's obviously 2020, 2021, there was a lot of buying and selling of real estate. That's kind of dying down now. And then eventually we have built out into the 5-10 year realm that there won't be as many new homes, so there won't be as much buying and selling. So it does go with our forecast trend. Okay, we'll take a little bit closer look at sales tax, as that is our largest resource. The highlighted first one is construction sales tax. We always like to point that one out. Sales tax has actually decreased 5% from 2021 and still makes up 23% of the total in 2022. And then the retail sales increased approximately 3% over 2021. and is about 44% of the total. And then accommodation, which is all of your restaurants, et cetera, that is 11% increase over prior year and is about 9% of the total. And I did look at the sales tax net of construction. So without the construction sales tax included in there, we increased 25% from 2020 to 2021. We can assume that has to do with a lot of the federal aid out in on the community. And then 21 to 2022, it only increased 8%. So that is what we would actually expect. So jumping over to some citywide expenditures, we have that overview by type, and I've also included a chart from 2021 to 2022 comparisons. So we can look at both. The top chart includes personnel, shows personnel is our largest portion of our citywide expenditures at 35%. I also broke that out so you could see the salaries and wages versus benefits. The total citywide expenditure, it increased 12% over 2021. As we know, we did a lot of hiring, but it also ended 13% under budget. Again, a lot of vacancies. And then down in the bottom chart, you can actually see that the bottom line is the personnel, and it shows your 2021, the increased budget for 2022, and then a decrease from the 2022 budget to 22 actual. And then capital outlays, 21% of the expenditures ended 73% under budget. And you will see in the budget amendment, we are looking to reauthorize $12.2 million in project budgets into 2023. And so that's that really long orange line down there showing that we had a lot budgeted that didn't get done that we need to roll forward. And then the next largest one is interfund transfers. At 18%, and those interfund transfers equal interfund transfers on the revenue side. I have a quick general fund summary. I won't go too deep into this. There's a lot of information on the revenues and expenditure data included in your packet, as well as on ClearGov. But since this is our major operating revenue or fund, just want to go over your general fund operating ended at 6.9 million. That is the column down at the right, 6.991. This is just the operating general fund. Has revenues of 18 million and expenditures of 16.6. So by the end of the year, we did have excess funds. Additionally, on the bottom chart, this includes our managerial funds in the general fund. So the purple line at the bottom, that one is your permit fund revenues, and that's at 2.87 million fund balance. And then the green, that one is your pandemic recovery. You can see in June, July, we actually got our second payment, and then we are actually spending that down. The ending fund balance on that one is just about 7.1 million. And then the blue line at the top, that's our contingency fund. That's where we put our construction, the majority of our construction sales tax, and it didn't have any expenditures last year. So that one's ending at about $7 million. So this is just to take a look at all of our funds overall and just kind of take note of a few of them. Our permit fund, as mentioned previously, this is our building and land permits. You can see the first one under, so I guess I should explain. You have your budgeted revenue, your revenue collected, and then a percent of budget, and then you have your expenditures budget expended, and then your the last column is your budgeted percent of budgeted. So permit fund, the first thing, as I mentioned, the revenues are down at 85.2%. I mentioned that previously, and then the expenditures are at 141.6%. And these are actually reimbursements to other funds for permit related work. And that's whether there's somebody working in the stormwater fund or street fund and they're reviewing permits, that goes there. And you'll note that the expenditure is more than budgeted. And normally we're not allowed to go over budget in expenditures, but because this fund as well as the contingency and the pandemic recovery funds are all managerial funds. They're consolidated into the general fund for budgeting and reporting purposes. So technically that fund is not over budget, but it's just transfers in and out of the general fund. And those actually get netted. So you won't see that when it actually comes to financial reporting at year end. The next one is the pandemic recovery. We only use 24% of the total budget, as these budgets include capital projects yet to begin, as well as contributions to the food bank and the VOA that hadn't been requested until 2023. Next down, we have under capital project funds. The first one is the capital project developer contributions. That's traffic mitigation. It's just got a really fancy name. The budget, as I mentioned, the revenues are actually down on that. And we'll closely monitor those. And then the expenditures are capital project related, and those are yet to be completed. So those will be rolled forward. And then the same in the real estate excise tax 2. And the infrastructure capital project. Infrastructure capital project is the fund, the project fund that we created for the 24th 91st project. So there's a lot of funding in there from the originally created to reseat the bond and then the transactions out of that. So those revenues and expenditures are mostly rolling forward into 2023. And then stormwater capital, the same for the expenditure. That's some capital projects that did not get completed that are rolling forward into 2023. And then you'll see down at the bottom, the capital equipment, those internal service funds, that's the computer, the police, and the public works. And those are budgeted purchases that hadn't been completed yet either. And so you will see those being rolled forward into the 2023 budget as well. And that is all I have. If you have questions for me, please feel free. Otherwise, I can move on to budget.
No. That's it. Quiet crowd. All right. Thank you, Barb. Let's move along to item number C, or letter C.
Okay. Am I up? Yep. Okay, so this is going to be our 2023 budget amendment number 1. I did add the detail of the amendment to your packet, so it is in there. There are a couple additions that I added at the end, so we can look at those separately. This just takes a look at your overall amendment for all funds. The only funds listed here are ones that are included in your first budget amendment, whether that's changing the beginning fund balance, adding or subtracting revenues, expenditures, and your change in ending balance. So this is just taking a look at all of them. This is a summary of all of the amendments. You can see we have the original budget amounts in there, and then this budget amendment, we are adding nearly 16 million in beginning fund balance. So all of the expenditures we didn't utilize that were rolling forward, those get added to your beginning fund balance. We're adding 3.38 in resources, and our ending balance will also increase. So we're not spending all the funding that we're rolling forward. So beginning balances, they're estimated during the budget process. And then once year-end 2022 is done, we roll those forward into 2023 beginning balances, and those get corrected. Revenues, most of the reappropriation is accounting for the 24th and 91st project. The sources, including the grant reimbursement, investment interest, and retainage held, and then adjustments to property tax and interest also contribute to the change. And I have a slide for that I'll go into that a little bit more. And then expenditures, again, we're looking at $12.2 million in capital projects being reappropriated. The largest is 24th 91st. That's about $11 million of that 12.2. And then reappropriating approximately 2.6 million in operating costs. And then adjusting operating costs, another $500,000, but approximately 430 of that is actually interfund transfers or have corresponding revenues to go along with the expenses. So we'll start with the grouped revenue. This was in your packet, but I just wanted to give you a bit more explanation on this. So the first one is your property tax. As I mentioned, due to the annexation portion of the levy calculation, we're actually decreasing our budgeted revenues by $139,000 for that. The calculation that's used by Snohomish County when they do the preliminary estimates, which is what we use for budget, they use the prior year levy rate times the annexation assessed value divided by 1,000. And that came up with $667,000 for the budgeted. When they did the final numbers, they actually used the new levy rate. And as you know, our assessed values went up, and so our levy rates went down. So we went from 91 cents for 1,000 to 72 cents for 1,000, but they used the same annexation assessed value. So it actually decreased us down to 524,800. So we did know that in December when we received the paperwork, but we were already through the budget. And so we figured we'd just bring that forward in the budget amendment. And then the next one is actually good. I mean, it's good in the sense that we're actually receiving interest on our money in our investments. It would be bad if we went out for bonds and things right now, but right now, overall interest, we're increasing by about $850,000 overall. And this is due to approximately 47% increase in rates. So we did a comparison January 2023, January 2023, and it increased 47% in our LGIP. So our allocations are actually done by fund and are based on month end balances. So we do a transfer allocation every month for the interest into those funds. Now we're going to go into some of the various operational amendments. The column at the end, I like to always point out, we have adjustments, ADJ, and then we have the RFs and the roll forwards. So the adjustments, those are the ones that didn't have budget in the prior year, or we need to increase the budget in the current year. So the first one we had was labor relations. As you know, we have union negotiations this year. We also have a couple of arbitrations. So we are increasing that budget. A couple of the utilities, so the visitor information center utility, it's a really small amount, but the budget is really small. So I wanted to actually add that in there so it didn't show them way over budget just for utilities. And then park communication, the more cameras, et cetera, we get, the more internet, the more in their communications budget. So we are increasing that as well. And then the transfer out, this is for permits, permit fund to reimburse general fund at this point. So we're just capturing more of that permit related charges for the reimbursement. The rest of these are all roll forward. We have roll forward for the state audit, the annexation and beautification projects, park recreation supplies. There was a little bit left from last year that we wanted to roll forward to go towards the skate park. So we did go ahead and roll that forward. We have the final payment for the wireless mics that needs to be rolled forward. We have some repairs and things that need to be done at the commercial building. And then we have the pandemic recovery professional services things. That's the Hartford Industrial Study Retail Strategies rolling forward. And then the, as I mentioned, the contributions for the food bank and the Volunteers of America also need to be rolled forward. We are looking to roll forward the remaining for the pavement preservation so we can continue to expand that overlay program. And then we have the comp plan update. We are rolling forward this $50,000 is for the transportation element. And then you will see later, Director Wright had actually sent a memo out regarding needing additional funds, and that isn't included in here. I didn't want to change what I had sent to you, but I do have it in a final slide showing the additions as well. And then we just have tree replacement and then purchase of capital equipment, as I mentioned, rolling forward what had not been purchased yet. This is where we actually group operational amendments. I've color coded them to the actual explanation at the bottom as well. Storm fees, these are payments for city-owned parcels. Insurance, we had increased cost, partially due to additional assets and reallocation. Arts, so in the blue, per our code, we actually contribute 1% of the contracted amount for eligible capital projects out of eligible funding sources. So when we normally grants are excluded and some of the restricted funding is excluded and mitigation is excluded. When we changed our ARPA funds to pandemic recovery funds and utilized salaries and benefits for ARPA, it changed the funding source in the 004 fund that we're using for a number of projects. So we're using for Eagle Ridge and Frontier Heights, Davies. There's a number of those. So we now need to actually utilize that 1% and put that into our art fund. So this just accounts for the contributions that we have as placeholders at this point. So that would just be money going into the arts fund, and then the remaining payment for the water tower we also rolled forward. Retainage, these are just ins and outs. So there's a revenue and an expenditure with both of these. We are required by state law to hold retainage on projects, and then we release it once everything's done. And then the coding down at the bottom, these are all coding corrections. These all have in and outs as well, revenues versus expenditures, or expenditure out of one fund into another fund. Just moving some things around. We needed to correct the coding for the mill deposits. We had been netting those. Proper accounting doesn't allow you to net those, so you see a revenue and an expenditure. The quartermaster supplies, we moved those into an operating account. And then the 131st sewer extension, we moved it out of REIT 1 and into REIT 2. Again, color coded here, we have insurance recovery. The sweeper, we were notified by our risk manager that the sweeper was damaged, and we received an insurance recovery for that, and was requested to place that budget back in as a placeholder for that. So you have a revenue and expenditure. Opioid settlements, same thing. You have revenue and expenditure on both sides, accounting for the settlement and the use of the settlements. And then the rest are grants or reimbursements. Again, you have both the revenue and expenditures on that. With the exception of the State Department of Ecology grant, we just did receive additional funding for that. And then our final and our operational, we have the police. We're reauthorizing projects and purchases that weren't completed, prior year invoices that we received in the current year, as well as equipment needs for prior year vacant positions, rolling those forward into the current year. I'm hoping to fill those positions and utilize that funding. And then additionally, we received another donation for the PD drone program, and this is accounted for in revenues and expenditures as well. And then the computer, we're reauthorizing all the IT projects and purchases. One we have in here, we actually had moved from the pandemic recovery fund into the computer replacement capital fund in order to complete these projects. And then it was determined that we should probably move that into the general fund and be done under IT professional services instead. So you just see the money actually be transferred into the general fund and then the expenditure to utilize it. And then we're on our capital. The first one's a Grimm House. There's some exterior work that needs to still be completed. Surface water capital reauthorizes the engineering contract budget for the downtown. And then also we need to account for staff salaries going towards these capital projects. And so that's what that is. The road capital reauthorizes the design budget for South Lake Stevens Path. And the expenditure for the SR 9204 welcome sign that the city was obligated to pay. Park capital, we have the remaining budgets for Cedarwood, Davies, Eagle Ridge, Frontier, everything's just being rolled forward. And then the Festival Street, just rolling forward that project. We did note that during our upload process and review of the CIP, we did duplicate a grant for the 160,000. So we're removing that duplication and removing the duplication of the expenditure and actually moving the remaining funding from park mitigation to REIT. And this is our sunset. So we're just rolling forward the revenue for that grant. We did receive that grant already in January. We just need to account for it so we can utilize it. Rolling forward the Sunset Beach expenditure, and then everything for the 24th and 91st project. That's all the revenues, all the expenditures, rolling everything forward that we haven't received invoices for yet. So as I mentioned, there was a few additional. So that was what was in your packet. Here's the few additional that we found after The top two are additional operating reauthorizations from the pandemic recovery funds. These are placeholders that were in last year for sewer assumption and financial software. Those just need to get rolled forward as placeholders again. And then additional operating request, the next two, one is in street and one is in the general fund. That has to do with the memo that Director Wright sent over after receiving the bids for the comp plan. Both the Transpo group and the other group who's doing the comprehensive plan, both bids were over, so he needed to add $58,805 to that budget. And so that's what this would do. And he is available. I know he's out of town, but he is available if you have questions on that as well. And then stormwater fees, as I mentioned, we just need to increase this revenue budget to show actuals received in 2022. And just of note, I think I mentioned this in the staff report as well. This does not include any of the revenues or expenditures for the Transportation Benefit District funding. We need to add a couple of funds, one fund to actually receipt the funding, and then potentially a road project fund as well, and then account for the transfers in and out on that. And so I'll be doing that very soon. The tax should have been in play on April 1st. We did get notification from Department of Revenue that it was going out that day. So we should restart receiving it in June. So by June, we will have all of our budgets and everything in place. And then we had one staffing update. It doesn't actually affect the budget. So it isn't really included in the budget amendment, but the planning department is having difficulty filling that vacant planning manager position. So they would like to accelerate the hiring of the planning lead position to the current quarter, to quarter two, instead of quarter four, where it was originally budgeted. And there'll be no budget amendment required, as the vacancy dollars will take care of that. I believe that's all I have. Any questions on the budget amendment? I know it was a lot this time.
Any questions?
Yeah, so the two that came in for the
comprehensive plan.
How many different bids do we hit? How many bids did we have for that work? Different companies. How many different companies?
Russ, are you available for that?
Yeah, I am. Good evening, council. So with the RFP, we actually only received one qualified bid, and we had that out for about 4 weeks, and I did an extension. And with engineering services, you can't dictate a sort of a price. You have to pay the market rate when those sort of bids come in. So we did do the request for proposals. What I've heard from other cities, it's been very competitive, and most of the firms are already engaged, and actually they're getting ready to start with the 2025 work for some other cities. So these are the groups that solicited based on our proposal.
Okay, thank you, Russ.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Barb. Thank you. So before you, we have, we're on the draft agenda here. Where did my other agenda go? Any comments, questions? The only, it shows number 11 as an action item. I'm assuming that's been advertised as a public hearing.
Not shown as a public hearing, it's just shown as an action item.
Isn't it a public hearing?
No. Hey, Russ, can you answer that?
Fine. Yeah, I'm looking over at the agenda. If you just give me a second there.
STR ordinance, is that a public hearing or an action item?
Next week, the STR would be the final public hearing. That is still an open public hearing by the council, and then looking for action to follow.
Okay.
So it has been advertised as a public hearing?
It has been.
All right, thank you.
I'll ensure it's moved to the correct place on the agenda. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. With that, I don't know where my agenda went, but Any other comments on draft agenda?
Yeah, I sent electronic communication to Council President Jorstad and to Director Wright that it's important that we have the council see the ordinance prior to it going to the public. Previously, there were changes made to the ordinance that were not supported by the committee members before it was put out to the public, and it created some confusion. So I hope that the council has a chance to look at it and confirm that it's actually what the recommendations that the 7 of us made. So we will end up with a continuation of this situation where the public gets information that's different than what the council's desire was.
Along with that public hearing, is a draft proposal out there? Is Russ still online?
Yeah, still online. The coinciding with the public notice, the current draft that included the council's suggested edits was posted. So there was something for the public to look at. And we can certainly forward that on to the council. And we did have 2 or 3 people look at that. And the consensus was that it captured all of the elements requested of the council.
So who can you name those people for the record that that looked that over? And why wasn't the council provided with that information if it's already been made public?
The city administrator, the city attorney, and Jill Needham on my staff have reviewed that document. And it wouldn't be typical to send council a draft outside of an agenda.
I mean, right.
So in light of what we experienced previously, how are we going to ensure that those who are making the decision, and this is a legislative body and not having unelected people drafting policy and putting things out to the public that reflect what they want and not what the legislative body has discussed?
Well, I would suggest that's the prerogative of the council. We can make amendments to that proposal and vote on it accordingly. If you don't feel that it was truly representative of what was discussed, I mean, that.
You'll have it on Friday when it comes out.
I get that.
This would be the first time that a draft came the way we wanted it. When it comes to STRs.
Yeah, yeah, that's, well, with a lot of things. Any other comments? We'll have it on Friday at 1 or 2 o'clock.
So I'm not okay with that. And if we need to make adjustments, and I see it, the council procedures, that this type of action where unelected people are making city policy and putting it out to the public, I would like to see if there's a way to mitigate that. At a minimum, the council president should have been involved in that to review to make sure that that's something that was reasonably reflective, since she represents us in that capacity, or even vice president in her absence.
So just to clarify, Russ, you said that a draft or a something went out to the public. It wasn't the ordinance itself. It was what, talking points or something?
The draft ordinance is what he said.
The draft regulations, based on the council's discussion that we had a few weeks ago, when the public hearing notice went out, I believe that has been updated to our website.
So you don't need to wait till Friday to look at it. They could see the draft ordinance on our website.
The draft regulations, not the ordinance.
I'm confused, Russ.
The ordinance is the formal adopting document that has the findings of fact, the whereas clause, And the regulations are an attachment to the ordinance. The ordinance has not been published.
Okay.
So the ordinance probably won't be adopted then on the 11th. It'll be based on the findings of fact that we recommend and pass, right?
Yes,
So we don't have an ordinance until
you will have that Friday, but
or whatever. I didn't hear what he said. What?
you
Repeat
will
that.
have that Friday with your packet.
The whereas statement that's
Yes.
connected to the regulations that
Yes.
are already posted.
Right, you'll have an adopting ordinance that adopts the proposed regulations.
Right, but the verbiage of what will go into code is already out there to the public. That's what we're saying. That's what you care about, right?
I don't care about the language, the actual verbiage that we've discussed for the last 15 months. That we've struggled to get to this point, when we've repeatedly had issues with. Things not reflecting what the legislative body has asked. And we specifically asked for that information, and then once again, we're being circumvented. And so I've got issue with that, especially when I've got serious issue with that.
So do you want to strike it from?
It's already out in the public. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, we're being circumvented. And it needs to be a process, and our council president hasn't even been involved in this process, and I'm concerned with that.
So I am looking at our website and the draft has not been published yet.
I can't find it anywhere.
I thought you said it was published.
I said I thought it was, and I'm confirming that it has not been published.
Okay, so
It would make sense to me that the people who are making decisions along with the public maybe be informed at the same time instead of at different times. But maybe I'm missing the process and I'm missing the protocol.
no, I think you have valid concerns. So do we want to, since it's not out in the public, do you want to push this to a workshop to see it beforehand? And then move it into an action item on the next agenda?
I would ask the city attorney to weigh in. The action from the council had been to push this to public hearing, and typical process is, publishing this with an agenda. So if there's a new protocol of how council would like information delivered, then that's something we need to know.
Well, you can always continue the public hearing. And if the council would like to workshop the draft regulations and delay the public hearing, you can take action to continue the public hearing. It's, lawfully notice, give notice to the public. But I mean, that's simply.
And I guess
My opinion is that it's coming to us way it normally comes to us as a packet coming out on Friday, and that's sufficient. And if we make a decision on Tuesday that we need to continue it, like you said, then we make that decision. We're gonna be getting it at the same time as the public gets it.
And again, maybe the public will have some of the same concerns that Councilmember Ewan is bringing up. So maybe, that's a point in time when we consider those items and either take action or no action on them and modify the proposal. So
This is the gift that just keeps on giving.
We'll find out Tuesday.
all right, with that, we have an executive session tonight. Is that correct?
How much time?
That's correct. It's potential litigation, reference RCW 42.30.110.1. And there is no action to follow.
Yep, so it is 7:43. They've asked for 15 minutes and we'll be coming back at 7:50.
So with that, the council meeting's over.
Yep, that's the time on the comeback here. 53,
7:58.
7:58, got there. Thank you. Go ahead, Muted.
There you go.
Okay, it's 7:58 and we're back in session.
Be adjourned. Be adjourned. So